have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a new world order.
And are we going to sit back and take it, and take it, and take it?
I certainly did not know anything.
There was no knowledge here at the White House.
This is a globally orchestrated meltdown to reshape the world into complete totalitarianism.
Prophecy is on fire in the world right now. It is on fire.
It's all about control. Circus ridiculous.
Broadcasting to the world now. It's the Weekend Report with Hagman and Hagman and the Weekend Vigilante.
Well, hello, listeners, and welcome to this very special edition of the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante. I'm your host, Sheila Zielinski, with Doug Hagman. It's the investigator and the instigator teaming up for this Saturday, September 20th, 2014 edition. Folks, we have an amazing show tonight. For the first half, we are joined by L.A. Marzulli. And for those that don't know L.A. Marzulli, I'm not sure what rock you've been hiding under, but L.A. is the highly acclaimed author of On the Trail of the Nephilim, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and more incredible books. He received an honorary doctorate for his work on the Nephilim trilogy. His books are hard-hitting exposés on topics such as giants, UFOs, alien deception, strange occurrences, and the agenda of the fallen angels. He's done the 8 installments of Watchers series. You've heard him on Coast to Coast AM, on TV, Prophecy in the News. He speaks to audiences worldwide, and we're so incredibly lucky and privileged to have him on tonight. I could go on, but without further ado, L.A., welcome to the program, sir.
Well, it's sort of humbling to hear all this. I'm sure you must be speaking about someone else.
I'm speaking about you.
Good grief.
Well, let's jump into things here. You know, Christians talking about this weird stuff. I mean, LA, as you know, Doug and I always get accused. We have people like Steve Quayle on our show all the time. And, of course, you know, we're talking about that weird stuff again. Why are you talking about this bizarro stuff, Sheila? So, LA, why are we talking about it? Because so many Christians today, they don't want to talk about fallen angels. They certainly don't want to talk about the supernatural and all these, and, you know, yet donkeys that are talking and coins and fish and walking on water and, staffs that become snakes. Come on, let's face it, the Bible, a lot of biblical overlays defy physics. So why are so many Christians so uncomfortable when they're dealing with these kind of subjects we're going to be talking about tonight?
I think most Christians are very afraid of the supernatural to begin with. Even though they read their Bibles, we read our Bibles, everything is cleaned up. It's all antiseptic. Everything's cleaned up. It's sanitized, antiseptic, and that's where we are. And the supernatural is very sloppy. You mentioned several of the things: stabs that turn into snakes, men that walk on water, coins that appear in fish's mouth. I mean, this stuff is crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. It is. And yet, that's what God seems to enjoy. I mean, Father El Elyon, one of his many titles, Most High God, enjoys this kind of stuff. He likes messing with it. I mean, when Jesus rose from the dead, I talk about this all the time. The apostles are in the upper room, and they're all freaked out. The doors are closed. They're afraid that the Romans are going to come in and take them and do the same thing to them because they're followers of Yeshua, followers of Jesus, right? So they're figuring, the jig's up. We're next. And, you know, the gentle Jesus, the white Jesus that we see with the lamb around his shoulders, you know, kind of going, hey, I'm Jesus, you know, would knock on the door and go, hey, guys, it's me, Jesus, I've risen from the dead, let me in, I'm going to come in now, okay? He doesn't do that. I mean, it's he just pops through the wall and appears, ta-da, and it's like, come on, they're all freaked out. And then he gets, it's me, it's okay, and then he does a typical guy thing, what have you guys got to eat? And, I mean, this is who we're dealing with here, a man's man that pulls no punches. You know, it's not this cleaned-up version, and I won't mention any names that we see that thousands of people go to every week and sit in the pews, and then somehow that's religion. That's a form of religion but denying its power. And the church needs to understand that until we allow the Holy Spirit back in to the church, which we've done a great job of keeping him out, And then we get in arguments, the acts of the Holy Spirit are only in the book of Acts and they died off with the apostles. Where does it say that? It's nonsense, because the supernatural is alarming. Most people don't know how to sit in the presence of God and just be still and know that He is God, right? Most people don't know how to, they don't do it. The churches don't practice it, and yet we're admonished to do that.
Well, when it comes to the Bible, there is a dark side to Bible prophecy, isn't there? But they don't want to talk about that part.
Well, there was again, I'm not mentioning names, there was this woman that wrote this scathing article about how there are no such thing as Nephilim, and that all these people like myself who were talking about it, don't have their heads on straight. I'm sort of taking liberty here, but that's what this person said, and I wrote the person back and said, listen, I've written 9 books on this subject. You got to do your homework. You're leading people astray. You have no idea what you're talking about, quite frankly. And it might be too abrupt and too in your face, but excuse me, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. You need to do some homework before you start blasting away at those of us who have spent years at great risk to bring this to the body of Messiah, to the body of Christ, to the Anointed One. And, look, what's going on, unless we understand what happened in Genesis 6, we have no idea when Jesus warns us that it'll be like the days of Noah when He returns. And it's completely mistranslated by most people.
Well, you're right. It absolutely is. And, I mean, that's a good segue, because speaking of writing 9 books, Ellie, for our new listeners and people less familiar with your work, say a total beginner, I think there's a lot of confusion between, and this is often I find when I read people's blogs and different kinds of forums, there's often a lot of confusion between giants and aliens and demons and fallen angels and Nephilim. So break that down for people. Differentiate that for us, please, if you will.
Real quick, the Nephilim, or the Nephilim, depending on how you want to pronounce it, are the offspring, the unholy offspring, of the union between the fallen angelic host of heaven and the women of earth. The offspring, the Nephilim, after the flood, became the disembodied spirits that we call demons today, which roam the earth. So the demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. The proof text for that is when Jesus sees the man of the tombs, the man of Gadara, and asks him, who are you? And the demons in him reply, Legion, for we are many. Fallen angels do not need to inhabit anyone. They can, but they don't need to inhabit anyone. It says Satan entered into Judas. That's an example of that. But demons need a body in order to materialize in this dimension. Satan does not need that. We know from several proof texts where Satan appears to Jesus after 40 days of fasting and takes him up to a high mountain and takes him to the Temple Mount, right? And it's basically moving him from place to place and then tempting him and asking him certain things. And he's there, physically. When the angels meet with the Most High God in heaven and Satan is amongst them, and the Most High God says, where have you been? And the fallen one says, I've been walking to and fro over the face of the earth. That's literal. He's walking to and fro over the face of the earth. Disembodied spirits of the Nephilim are the demonic entities which roam the earth. They are earthbound spirits. They do, I think, have access to the second heaven, but they're mostly earthbound spirits, and they're demonic, and they're in a fixed state. There can be no redemption for them. They're in a fixed state, and they hate us, and they are incredibly malevolent, incredibly evil. And those are the disembodied spirits of the progeny of the fallen angels and the women of earth, known as the Nephilim. So aliens, like we see in movies, are 2 schools of thought. One school is that these so-called aliens are from the Pleiades star cluster, or Zeta Reticuli, or Betelgeuse, or wherever, and they've flown here, and they are, in fact, our progenitors. They are our creators. Those scholars, let's say, when I use the word loosely, like Richard Dawkins, but he's a very brilliant man, and he's certainly one of the most ardent supporters of Darwinian paradigm, Darwinism, and he believes in panspermia, that perhaps millions of years ago a race of highly evolved extraterrestrials created us in a laboratory and seeded us through the universe. We landed up here on Earth, and presto changeo, here we are today. And so he believes, as many people do, the idea of panspermia, that at some point they, E.T., will come back. usher us into a time of peace and prosperity, give us a DNA upgrade, and on and on and on, free energy. The exopolitic movement, getting more legs even as we speak, is embracing this ideology. The exopolitic movement, the ancient alien crowd that believes in the ancient astronauts, also hold to this paradigm. I do not hold to this paradigm. I believe we are looking at a cosmic ruse which has been set in place, and the springboard for that, of course, would be the Darwinian paradigm, or Darwinism, happening in the middle of the 19th century, a long, long time ago now, really, when you think about it. And that has cut the legs off from underneath of the Christian worldview, and has replaced and become the dominant paradigm in which everything in academia and people in the scientific community, that's what they embrace. That's the centerpiece. That's the paradigm that is sacrosanct in both academia and the scientific community, the Darwinian paradigm. So the Christian worldview that a loving God created everything ex nihilo, spoke it into existence, is no longer in vogue. In fact, those people like myself are looked at as sort of a throwback to Neanderthals, because we believe that Jesus spoke everything into existence, and we get that from John. Which interesting is, they'll scoff at us and they'll laugh at us, but somehow it's okay for Dawkins to say, well, maybe millions of years ago a race of extraterrestrials created us and seeded us through the galaxy. I mean, he has no clue as to how any of this began. None. But somehow we can't, it's intellectual fascism, because we can't hold to our belief. His belief is just as absurd as ours, perhaps more so. At least we've got the thread of prophecy, which is spoken thousands of years ago, a priori, and all those prophecies, many of those prophecies have come true with 100% accuracy. Dawkins has nothing to hang his hat on, his intellectual hat on. We've got a steady stream of prophetic utterances by different prophets over thousands of years coming true, and we see many of those prophecies coming to light and coming into fruition even now, even as I speak, when we look at what's going on in the Middle East. So that at least points us to this God, whoever you may think he may be, that somehow is outside space-time as we know it, and is calling out the beginning from the end, just like Isaiah tells us, and the end before the beginning, and does so with great specificity. And, Edgar Casey and Blossom Goodchild, and with all due respect to all those Nostradamians out there who believe in Nostradamus, they're about 50 to 60% accurate. And I get into this, how they're able to do it from the cosmic chess match. But that's it. They're not all-knowing. They're not accurate 100% of the time, where the biblical prophetic utterances are 100% accurate 100% of the time. And frankly, that we're seeing, in my opinion, the nascent beginnings of the Psalm 83 war, as my colleague and good friend Bill Salas has written about.
Well, it's interesting you mention academia, because your discoveries really do not fit within that Darwinian theory. I mean, if archaeologists were really honest, they would step back, and whether you want to call them alignments to occult sciences and everything else, I mean, they've really taken great lengths to make sure information is very much obfuscated and subdued. And, for example, you've found from DNA findings and theories about the mysterious elongated skulls and artifacts. In fact, you were in Peru this year, Corral, one of the oldest ancient cities in the Americas. Tell our listeners, you have a very interesting culture built. You have advanced disciplines in geometry, engineering, astronomy, architecture, very complex sites, and it really begs the question, I guess, L.A., where did this knowledge come from? With these ancient Peruvians, tie in your DNA findings, get into the Paracas people, maybe they could be a Nephilim tribe, and then springboard into one of the unwrapped baby mummy skulls that was buried for 2,000 years that you found.
I'd love to. The DNA evidence, first of all, samples were taken out of Peru about 3 or 4 years ago now by the late Lloyd Pye, who was the possessor of the Star Child skull. And they were given to a geneticist who worked on them and told a friend and colleague of mine, Brian Forrester, about them, who emailed me. Brian released it and created an internet firestorm. He was attacked viciously. Oh, these samples were taken out illegally. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Well, no one, who's the geneticist? Who's this? Where did this come from? But I've spoken to the geneticist, and Christians did the same thing. And certain ministries, it's a contaminated, there's also Nephilim, blah, blah, blah. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Everybody needs to take a big, deep breath here. First of all, we are in the process. We have 9 samples that are in Peru that were taken from Senior Juan's Paracas History Museum under the aegis of a Peruvian archaeologist. He has the samples. We are working with 2 archaeologists here in the States, one and another one in Oviedo, Spain, to get the proper paperwork together to the Minister of Culture from Peru to get the samples out to be tested. Now, this begs the question, first of all, why hasn't anyone done this before? I mean, hello, McFly, why hasn't it been done? The Julio Teo Museum has 10,000 skulls. Not one of them has been DNA tested. When I spoke of a director on there, I offered, we'll do testing for you. Well, you've got to go to the Minister of Culture. Well, don't you want to get the DNA testing? Yeah, but you've got to. Can you grease the wheels? No, but you got to. It's like it's just unfreaking believable how no one, will take the step. I'm not even an archaeologist or an anthropologist. I have no letters after my name, no formal training, but I read voraciously, and what I don't know, I ask the experts. Well, you tell me. The geneticist told us that the mitochondrial DNA, segments of the mitochondrial DNA, did not match anything in the genome, in any of the databases that they had. Nothing. Not Denisovan, not Neanderthal, nothing. Now, okay, that's completely inconclusive. I get it. But, academia attacked us, Christians attacked us, and I had nothing to do with it. Lloyd Pye was the one that took the samples out. Brian Forrester had nothing to do with it, as far as I know. Lloyd Pye took the samples, and he's no longer with us. So the geneticist, after Lloyd Pye passed away, the geneticist got a hold of Brian, who then got a hold of me, and I've spoken to the geneticist numerous times, and I'm in constant communication with him, basically, letting him know where we are and getting the 9 samples out. We are desperately trying to get those samples out. What's interesting is these elongated skulls. If our hypothesis is true, that when the conquest of the Levant, Israel, the Promised Land, happened about 3,500 years ago, many of the Nephilim tribes, we posit that when the slaughter began, because these are hybrid beings, they fled. They left the area. Some went northward into the Americas. Others went perhaps across the Atlantic, which is very easy to do, winding up in the Gulf of Mexico and populated that way. They could have sailed down the Gulf of Mexico and gone across what is now the Panama Canal and settled in Ecuador and Peru. They could have gone the other way and out the Red Sea and come across that way. All we know is that the Paracas people show up in the area right around the timeline of the conquest of the Levant, around 3,500 years ago. The culture that they have springs up from nowhere, and these are where the elongated skulls are found. No other place that we know of. Let me back up on that. There are elongated skulls all over the planet, so that's what I'm saying. What I'm trying to get at is the Paracas culture are the skulls with the elongated skulls. The Wari culture, the Nazca culture, the Moishe culture, which comes afterwards, do not have elongated skulls. Only the Paracas culture does. Some of them are cradle headboarded. We get that. But others we do not think are cradle headboarded. This is why it's so imperative to get the DNA, because only the DNA testing will let you know. I was at an osteological museum here in the States. I won't tell you where it is. They had 6 skulls from Paracas that were donated to them in 1992. I offered to test the DNA. Now these are men of science, okay? And I offered a $5,000 contribution to the building of their new museum, which got their attention, but they declined. Why? They didn't want to be associated with my work. What are you afraid of? What are these scientific men of letters afraid of?
Right.
And look, if I'm wrong, great, I'm wrong, fine. But if the DNA evidence shows that there's an outside agency manipulating the genome, which doesn't match anything in the database, my gosh, guess what? The world ain't flat anymore, And that's what we need. I mean, these are men of letters, men of science, afraid. Oh, you might hurt the integrity of the skull by taking a very small piece of bone off. Where? I mean, I can't even believe it. I'm incensed. You can tell that I'm incensed. This is what we're up against. And everything, Sheila, is controlled. All the information is controlled.
Sure
we have to have a university. The archaeologists that will write this prospectus, basically, to the Ministry of Culture in Peru, will be tied in to a university. Otherwise, it won't go anywhere. Otherwise, it's a flat-out no. In other words, if you're an archaeologist and you're not part of a university and you want access to this stuff, they'll just flat-out deny you. And the reason why it's tied to a university is because everything is controlled, all of it.
Well, what happens when these things don't match the genomes and the genetic markers in their databases? That is exactly the point, is, you're disputing, again, proof that endangers their Darwinian paradigm. So they attack the people, not the evidence. Well, what's interesting is, flipping gears a little bit, one of the interesting things I found about this mummified, elongated skull, the baby skull, this was interesting because, L.A., my family is Native American from Montana, and I know our elders talked about a race of red-haired giants, very cannibalistic, tall, super beings.
There you go.
And that's really an interesting shift in what's typically presented, isn't it?
Well, it is. We have one site in a location which I won't mention, and we have. I've gone up there. I protocoled the chief and the medicine man. I've been to the site. I know that these mounds were excavated in the 60s, but not. Again, can you see the report? Well, you could for a while. Now it's been redacted, so you can't see it. We've got a copy of the report stating that the remains that were found, they didn't say the height or anything like that, but they said the remains that were found, that they were not akin to any known Native American tribe. Bingo. And so the letter we've written to this one particular tribe, and Sheila, if you can help us out here, it'd be great. But I'm working with Chief Joseph Riverwind on this, who's a war chief from the Taino tribe, which is down in Puerto Rico. And Chief Joseph and I were up there, and we protocoled the chief of this one particular tribe and went to the site, and we wrote this, the three of us, Chief Joseph's wife, Laura Lynn, and myself, and Chief Joseph all worked on the letter, basically stating that, with all due respect, we do not believe that these are Native American remains, number one. Number two, your oral tradition speaks of red-haired, cannibalistic giants, which the white man has discounted as mythos. Part of what we want to do is to prove the Native American oral tradition. And I have spoken, and on the record, it'll be on the Trail of a Nephilim 2, which will come out sometime in late October. And I've spoken to Chief Joseph Taino, who talks about that, the Cherokee, who talks about the red-haired giants.
L.A., I just want to throw this in because where I was going with that, just to clarify for the audience, was that in Peru, this mummified skull baby, I mean, the hair color was strawberry blonde. And that
blonde.
That's quite something, isn't it?
That's telling. That's not Native American.
Yeah.
Not Native American.
Very much.
Nor is red-haired cannibalistic giants.
They're wrapped in these tapestries or silks. You have to wonder, most people in antiquity used very extensive wrapping and tapestries, and you got to wonder where that comes from.
Well, you were talking about Corral, the most ancient city in the Americas, at least that we know of, and that's in Peru, north of Lima, about 3 hours. And I was there just a few months ago, and what I saw was astounding. Because you've already mentioned it, Sheila. There's advanced geometry, there's mathematics, there's engineering, there's construction, architecture. I mean, all this stuff just comes out of nowhere. And the complex, it looks very similar to Teotihuacan, which I've got a stack of about 12 books here that I'm weeding through. Teotihuacan rises up thousands of years later, much, much later than Corral. But where does it come from? And why are these people doing this stuff on a Monday morning? What motivates them to create these edifices? And Teotihuacan is known as the city of the gods. So, and Native Americans talk about the star people. Some outside agency is coming down here, in my opinion, and dispensing this knowledge, and does it in these different locations. These entities that are here are worshipped as gods. Literally, they are worshipped as gods because they can do things. They can perhaps move objects. They are perhaps telepathic. They have other powers and other knowledge which mortals at the time do not have in their possession. and so they are worshipped as gods. And we get some of this stuff from Greek mythos, Hercules, and the pantheon of Greek and Roman gods. I think there's a connection to the fallen angelic host, and I think that it happened here in the Americas, North, Central, and South America.
Well, you cover a lot of abduction phenomena at great length in your books. Obviously, you believe they're creating a hybrid race in the last days. I mean, so Daniel 2:4-2 really talks about this word cleave, and I think it's so interesting because it's the same word in Genesis in regards to marriage. So, you know, in alien abduction scenarios, you talk about how they come and take people, they impregnate women, the fetus gets taken. You know, it reeks of that back to Genesis. So you could say maybe this is some kind of diabolical breeding program that started in ancient time, because it really smacks of that, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and you've done your homework. I can tell by what your questions are incredibly erudite. My hat is off to you, Sheila. You've really done your background work and you've done your homework. That's exactly true. The abduction phenomena goes back to Genesis 6, and interesting, you talked about the chapter in Daniel, and this is the work of my friend and colleague Jim Williamson, who talks about that word cleave, they will not cleave to them. In other words, they're not given and taken in marriage as they are in the Genesis 6 account, which is exactly what we see happening today. There's no marriage given to the women who were taken. In Genesis 6, the fallen angels came down, they took the women and created this race of hybrid beings known as the Nephilim. That's not happening today. The women are taken. And look, people out there, I get this all the time, they scoff at this and they laugh. What evidence do you have? Well, we've got some evidence, and we've talked about this in our Watcher series with the implants. And these implants, and people scoff at them too, but when you're in an operating theater, and we've done this in Watchers 7 and Watchers 8, and we did the entire process is on film, from Bill talking about how he was abducted when he was 5 years old, and the implant is there, to the x-rays, to the Gauss meter, which measures the magnetic field, to a stud finder, which shows a metallic object, to a CAT scan, which once again shows that there's a metallic object below the knee, to an ultrasound, which then shows, yes, there's a metallic object below the knee, to the day when we're in the operating theater and we can't find the object. And one simple prayer to Father God breaks that power of the fallen one, and all of a sudden the object is there, and we take it out, and then 2 days later we're at SEAL Lab looking at it through a scanning electron microscope. So the skeptic will say there's no physical evidence. We're saying we've got major physical evidence, and we have a trail of evidence, and we have testimony from every step of the way, and it's documented and it's on film. We're one of the few, Watchers is one of the few documentaries which actually shows all that from beginning to end. So, the government must be doing it. Well, that's what you're saying. So, instead of sitting there in your ivory tower and, telling us how we're all crazy, why don't you go out and prove us wrong? Why don't you go find someone who's got an implant in them, and you do the testing, and you spend your time and money? And, of course, no one does that. But we have. We spend our time and our money, and that's what's amazing about Watchers. 6, 7, and 8 talk about the implants, talk about this one man who we call Bill, and traces every step of the way until finally we get the implant out and surgery. And there were forces, Sheila, that knew we were there, that had cloaked the device, that shut it down. We could not find it with the ultrasound machine. The Gauss meter flatline. The stud finder went off everywhere on Bill's body. It was like the thing was being cloaked.
That, you felt compelled to pray, especially when you're standing in a room of non-believers, the object, and then it reappears. I mean, spiritual warfare is
spiritual warfare 2.0.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Well, I mean, if you look around, though, whether these unscrupulous hucksters that want to suppress this information, I mean, just look at the seed, the genetics. The Levitical law always refers to bloodlines and contaminating the bloodlines. Look back to Noah, he was the only perfect man that didn't have a corrupt bloodline. If you look at Matthew, springboarding from that, Genesis 3:15 also talks about putting enmity, that's commonly referred to as a battle between Jesus and Satan. And it's interesting because if you look in Matthew 24:37, so as the days of Noah, isn't Jesus saying there the conditions before the flood will reemerge in the last days? Whether or not these atheist schools want to balk at our information. The Bible lays all this out very clearly, from Genesis 6 to Daniel 2:4-2 to Genesis, a lot of places in Genesis, but also Leviticus. It all interconnects, doesn't it?
It does, and that's what's amazing about being a student of biblical prophecy, because all this is prophecy. When Jesus is saying, you mentioned that scripture in Matthew, they were eating and drinking. Well, who is the they that Jesus is talking about? And it's not people. And he's pointing back to the days of Noah. And that's why Genesis 6 is astounding. Unless we come to a grips of what's really going on in Genesis 6, when we get to Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, we don't have a clue as to what he's talking about. We don't understand. It's like it just water off a duck's back. It's like, well, I guess he's talking about people. He's not. They are the fallen angels. And that's what's so critical about the right interpretation of Genesis 6. And it amazes me, unless we understand that, we don't understand the seed war, which is one of the first early prophecies of the Bible, where Father God is basically saying, look, your seed, the seed of the serpent, is going to be at enmity, at war, essentially, with the seed of the woman. That's exactly what we're seeing today with the abduction phenomena. What amazes me is that so many of these pastors out there, and look, I mean, I'm not bagging on you guys, for those of you who are listening. There are a lot of good men out there who are in the trenches, and we speak at a lot of different conferences with a lot of pastors. A lot of pastors are waking up, hallelujah. But there's also a lot out there that won't touch us with a 10-foot pole, and they're afraid to look at it. And yet, and this is the problem, and we talked about this earlier, we're the people that believe in the virgin birth, floating axe heads, talking donkeys, two gold coins that appear in the fish of mouth, guys that are swallowed up by whales, regurgitated 3 days later, water that turns into wine, men that walk on water, staffs that, split the Red Sea and people walk across on dry land, and on and on and on and on and on it goes. The Bible is rife with supernatural events. We are warned that Satan will come with all signs and lying wonders. 2 Thessalonians tells us about this. So why are we surprised? We should be looking, if we are in the last days in the end times, to what is manifesting on the planet. And if it's not this, then you show me what it is. And that's what it is. It's manifesting like crazy on the planet. For those of us who have eyes to see and ears to hear, for those of us who scoff at it and won't do a modicum of research, like this one person who was trying to tell me that there were no such thing as Nephilim, do your homework before you write a paper like this. Do a modicum of research before you get on your high horse and tell us that this stuff didn't exist, because it did. And I stand on the shoulders of great men like G.H. Pember and Clarence Larkin, and my mentor, Dr. I.D.G. Thomas, who passed away last year. I stand on their shoulders. And, it's like these guys aren't fruitcakes. And Pember's talking about it over 150 years ago, what it was going to be like. And Dr. Thomas warned about it in his classic book, The Omega Conspiracy. And Clarence Larkin wrote about it. I mean, there are many, many good biblical scholars with sound exegesis who looked at these passages and warned of what was coming. Guess what, folks? It's here. It is here. And the church really needs to wake up and understand the unprecedented, tenuous, tumultuous times that we are living in.
Well, when you go back to the Tower of Babel, Nimrod becomes Gibborim, a Nephilim. If you study it out in the Hebrew, it almost appears like there's this weird ritualistic sex magic going on. You fast forward to Lot, to Aleister Crowley, to Jack Parsons, to the Nazi backbreeding. The common thread here, I guess, is this very nefarious, malevolent, ritualistic sex magic. That's really what's going on here, isn't it?
Well, the sex magic is all through the Scripture, and that's what people don't get. How is it that when Moses shows up to Pharaoh, there's a whole cadre of Egyptian sorcerers who can duplicate the first 3 plagues? Think about that. See, the church doesn't get this. It just drives me crazy. Where does it come from? Why is it already in place? There's a whole worldwide paradigm that's going on here. They're already adepts. They're already working it. They're already doing it. So Moses shows up. He goes, that's nothing. We can do the same thing. And they do. They duplicate the first 3 plagues. And they finally go, oops, this is the real God here. And they fade from the scene. But look, this stuff is happening. ritualistic sex matching. Look at Aleister Crowley. Look at Parsons with Babylon working ritual that he did. Look at the rituals that happened in every single city. Look, I was a music director before I started doing this full time, and I was, that was my, sort of tent making on some level. Lord had me do that for like probably 25 years off and on. And I did other things too, but I got into writing like in the 90s is when I started to write and really research and take it seriously. But I was a music director at Malibu Vineyard, big church, about 3,000 people, and typically I would show up on Sunday morning and be the first person to show up. And if the service was at 9 o'clock, I'd be there at like 7:30. I'd open the building up, turn on the soundboard, get things ready, turn on the air conditioner, all that stuff. Just part of what I did. Got there early, get everything set up, make sure everybody was going to be okay, blah, blah, blah. So one morning, 7:30, I drive up, get out of my car, and I start to walk in the building, and instantly I'm taken aback by what I see. There in front of me, in front of the front doors of the building, is a large circle painted in black. And in that circle is a pentagram. And in that pentagram are two candles which are still burning. And between the two candles is a slaughtered dove. That is ritualistic magic.
Yes.
And that church, Malibu Vineyard, had the worst split I've ever seen. 6 months later, there was no more Malibu Vineyard.
It's all over the place. I mean, look at Wernher von Braun, the card-carrying Nazi rocket scientist. He admits they get their technology from these evil alien entities. And look at the Catholic Church now, L.A. They really seem to be taking an interest in our alien saviors. I mean, the Pope coming out with statements we've never heard from the Vatican. It's on record saying, we're going to be baptizing aliens, and the fact that the Catholic Church is welcoming them with open arms, and now, move towards the rumblings in the Middle East. When you connect the dots of your research, could we be moving toward some type of event, some kind of trigger of the supernatural? Because all this talk about aliens, this would be the perfect scenario to stage a contingent for them to pose as our saviors, wouldn't it?
Well, that's what you just outlined is what I call the coming great deception, and that's exactly what is going to happen. There's going to be an event, more than likely a nuclear war, probably think the Middle East here, and I've blogged about this incessantly. The globe is wired together because of the satellites, because of the Internet. Everything is wired together. When the Fukushima earthquake at 9.0 or 9.2 happened off the Fukushima prefecture in Japan, we saw the tidal wave in real time. That was real. That wasn't taped. That was real because of the satellites. Helicopters are up there. They're filming the whole deal, and we're watching it live. And that's where we are. When Oswald was shot by Ruby, that was live TV. And we all saw it. Well, that was in the 60s. Now it's like, are you kidding me? It's at the speed of live, and it's global. So when a nuclear event happens, and that's my hypothesis, and this is based also, the late David Flynn talked about the same thing. We both got there together, that he believed, as I do, that there's going to be some nuclear event which will cause the greatest amount of collective fear that humankind has ever experienced together as a collective, because we're wired together. And
we're really going to start seeing a lot more manifestations, I think, because I think it's you that talks about this sort of cosmic battle that's been raging forever, but it's really about to spill over into our everyday life a lot more. We're seeing more frequent physical manifestations, but it's really going to ramp up and become more alarming as time goes on, isn't it?
Absolutely. It already is. We're getting 1,000 to 2,000 UFO sightings per month, crop circles, cattle mutilations, the abductions. The phenomenon continues, unabated, unchecked. When you have someone like Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Defense Minister, come forward and state unequivocally that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead, what do we make of that? What is it going to take before people wake up and understand that something is happening and it's not good? And the Vatican's already on board with it. Chris Putman and Tom Horn in their groundbreaking book, Ex Vaticana, talk about that. And we interviewed Chris, I think, for Watchers 7.
Right.
That's what's going on. This stuff is happening, and most people are in la-la land.
Well, what's really interesting is even the mainstream is talking about it more and more. And even the Royal Academy of Science, of all things they could have pick to talk about at their big 350th anniversary, they pick the giant topic, are we alone in the universe, and what are the implications for that? Because it's always this very malevolent, I believe it's malevolent, but it's always guised as very benevolent. The nice little aliens are who are going to come to give us their technology and, we come in peace. That's really perpetrated, isn't it?
That's where it's headed. Look, I think that the U.S. and many of the governments on the planet know exactly what's going on. And at some point there's going to be disclosure. We're already seeing what I would call soft disclosure in this country, where the news media now, Bob and Ted will be the anchors on some local news channel, and, well, Bob, those little green men are back. That's right, Ted, they are. And here's Frank in the field to tell us about it. Well, we saw lights in the sky, but we're not sure what they were. And here's, and they just, and that's soft disclosure. And that's what they do. And everybody yucks it up, and, don't worry about a thing, and then they'll right after that story, they'll cut into, well, fire in Kensington tonight, and, 8 people hurt. It's just like, what? But that's how it's done. That's how it's done.
Well, would it be fair to say, I think about when Jesus calls unclean spirits, I guess spirits of progeny of the giants, cursed to wander the earth bodiless until the day of judgment when the Son of Man returns. When you have possessing spirits, indwelling demonic spirits, you mentioned a legion that can inhabit the body and soul. People who dabble in the occult have no idea what they're doing. And I think we as believers have to really be very much watching and paying attention to what's going on, because as believers, we have the authority over them. But, this can get very insidious, can't it?
Well, look, we have authority over them, and I get that. But I just came through a very, very difficult period for the last 8 months where I was really being hit, and I mean hit hard. Really hit hard. And it was very unpleasant. And I put my armor on every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, I'll be reminded. And it was very intense. Look, what is coming is unprecedented, Sheila. That's all I can tell you. Hopefully the church gets taken out before it really gets too bad. But we're already seeing stuff. And that's what the people, and look, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. That's what I hold to, and I believe in that. But on the other hand, we're already seeing stuff. How much more are we going to see before we get taken out? How bad is it really going to get? It's getting really weird. And let me just give you a quick roundup. You got the Eyjafjallajökull volcano and the Bardarbunga volcano. The Bardarbunga is a super caldera in Iceland. Eyjafjallajökull blew a couple years ago, and when it did, it closed the airspace over northern Europe. Now he's got Yellowstone, and we can't get a straight answer out of anybody with Yellowstone. The asphalt's melting. Is something about to happen there? We've got the constant Ring of Fire, which is happening with the earthquakes, starting from Alaska down the west coast of North, Central, and South America. We get very large earthquakes in Mexico, 7.0. We got one in Peru a couple of weeks ago, 7.5. It swings out to Vanuatu, which is always that's the home of the 7.5. And then New Zealand and Australia, and then back up at Japan, which talk about Fukushima, and 9.0, and then it swings over to Alaska. Well, the West Coast really hasn't been hit. There was one in San Francisco, but Los Angeles has not had one in over 20 years. We're overdue for one. The 9.0 Fukushima hit the reactor there, and the San Onofre reactor is very similar to, in Los Angeles, outside of L.A., very similar to what happened in Fukushima Prefecture. Now we're getting radiation leaks from the number 4 reactor, which has been going on continually, and it has not stopped, and no one talks about that. Then we've got the Arab Spring, which has turned into the Arab Winter, which has turned into the Arab Spring, and it goes on and on and on with the civil war in Syria with Bashar al-Assad. Over 250,000 Syrians have been killed. People have been displaced, millions of people displaced, and the war has not stopped. ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq, or Syria, Iraq, and the Levant, ISIL, that's the original name, is Islamic, according to our president, who's trying to tell us that, ISIL is really not Islamic. Excuse me, Barack Hussein Obama, with all due respect, sir, you are POTUS, and the office allows me to give you that respect, or dictates that I give you that respect. What about Islamic State of Syria, Iraq, and the Levant don't we get? It is Islamic, and this is what's going on. But more than likely, ISIL was trained by CIA operatives in Jordan, and they were there to depose and overthrow Bashar al-Assad, the lion of Syria, which they have not been able to do. They turned rogue, and the rest is history. So the Middle East is more of a conundrum than ever. We see Hamas in the south in Gaza. We see Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed to the teeth. Hamas is just rearming. At some point, the rockets will fly. We've got Iran, which is trying to build a nuke, and it only has one reason, to cut off the head of the snake, who they think is Israel, to destroy the Zionist regime. We get it over and over and over again, and yet the world does nothing about it. Iran does not want nuclear energy for peaceful means. Hello, McFly. And that's what's going to happen. And so Israel have no choice, and this is why we're looking at Psalm 83 war, which my friend and colleague Bill Salas has written about. It is going to happen. Israel have no choice but to cut the heads off of three different snakes because they're surrounded. Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. They're going to have to raid the Bashar reactor at some point. Then you got Putin doing flyovers in Europe. You got the whole Ukrainian thing. You got the nutcase in North Korea, which every now and then when he's got nothing else better to do, he starts, letting missiles fly and threatening the South and all this other nonsense. Then you've got BRICS, and this is alarming, folks. You've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS. That's the anagram. And what they're trying to do is get the world off the petrodollar, which has been in place since World War II, and go to the yuan as the default currency. I believe it may happen sooner than we think. With trillions of dollars of debt, we've got no financial credibility anywhere. Watch the gold and silver market. Watch what's going on. And this is huge. If it happens, and it's a default, if they move out of the petrodollar as a default currency and move to the yuan, it's game over. It is game over in this country. You will see the economic collapse of America. One more thing, and then I'll stop, but I could continue here. You've got the threat of an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse weapon, which is my greatest fear. Congress has had the ability numerous times to go back and beef up the grid, the electrical grid, because when an EMP happens, the grid shuts down. It's over. And it doesn't come back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It doesn't come back more than likely for a year. And if that happens in the winter, millions of people will die, because life as we know it goes back to industrial revolution. And that's, 150, 160 years ago. That's all it is. And the refrigerator doesn't work, the car doesn't start, your microwave doesn't happen, you can't clean your house, the heater doesn't work, nothing works. You go back to pre-industrial revolution time, which means you're basically back not to the Stone Age, but you're looking at wood fires, coal fires, and horse and buggy. That's it. That's what we got.
Well, yeah, we are getting pummeled 6 ways to Sunday, and as horrid as everything you just talked about is unfolding, I think the overarching bigger connection is that at the very top of this unholy orchestrated destruction is Lucifer. The ultimate evil kingpin, the granddaddy of evil, whether it's ISIS beheadings, economic meltdowns, this is a thick stew of satanic soup, really. And I like what Steve Quayle uses all the time, dumb unto death. And if people, seriously, we are supposed to be looking and watching the affairs of the earth and being wise as serpents. And, people perish for lack of knowledge. So living with our eyes open is imperative. But ignorance is getting worse in the so-called church, isn't it? You talked earlier about someone who I talk about all the time, the Joel Osteens of the world. We need very strong men right now, Christian men that are really tapped into the Holy Spirit, because even the elect will be deceived.
Even the elect will be deceived whenever possible. Absolutely. And this is where we are. This is why it's unprecedented, tenuous, tumultuous times we're living in. And unfortunately, with all due respect to Mr. Osteen, who I've never met, I'm sure he's a fine guy, but with everything that's happening, Jesus gives us the playbook. Wars and rumors of wars, famines and pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places, troublesome times, men faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth. Be like the days of Noah. There's the playbook. And we either perish, like you said, for lack of knowledge, which is exactly what's happening now, or we have to ask ourselves, and I just gave you the world wrap-up very quickly of what's happening on the planet. I didn't touch the animal fish die-offs or the record temperatures going on or the mini ice ages that's happening and all this other stuff. It is unprecedented. Earthquakes all over the place. Look at the Ebola virus now. Over 2,500 people already killed. The virus is mutating. This could become a pandemic. And this is serious. This is real serious stuff.
Well, and look, when you were talking, you mentioned Tom Horn earlier. He's talked a lot about these chimeria, the half alien, half reptilian, half human. I mean, we're always being set up. The Hollywood hucksters like to inundate us, whether it's the movie Contagion, which I really recommend if people want to get a good little segue into our show this week at the end of the week when we talk about the very nefarious Bill Gates and insidious what's going on with this Ebola virus, who owns the patent, who owns the mandated vaccinations, what's coming. I mean, we are absolutely just getting inundated, are we not?
Yeah, it's a managed agenda, as Chuck Messer calls it, but it is.
Yes.
It's a carefully managed agenda. And look, why would Obama, not shifting gears, but it's all part of the same ugly head, why would Obama allow tens of thousands of illegal children into the country? What's the point of that? Because once again, it'll break the back of the country, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to take down America. Who are they? Military-industrial complex, the secret government, the elites. But just go to the Georgia Guidestones. It's all right there. They want to cull the population. They want the demise of the United States.
Changing gears a little bit, I had a lot of people ask me this before the show. Please ask LA about the black-eyed children. I've got that for months now. I mean, obviously, I think they're hybrid children, but I'd really like to get your take on what you think.
We're looking at, they appear as children, but they're far older than that. They're hybrid beings of some kind that didn't quite make it, and they're sort of the avant-garde, the advanced guard. They leave when the fear has, or the greatest climax of fear. That's when their job is done, and they leave. The black-eyed kids, I have not gotten any reports recently, but they do come in from time to time. And these so-called children will show up, and when they do, there's usually a knock on the door. And you hear when the woman or the man goes to the door, they'll look down, and there's these two kids, and they've got baseball caps on. And one of the kids will say, "Is it food time yet?" And the man or woman will go, what do you kids want? I mean, food time? What are you saying? You know, and it's like, it's very, very bizarre. And at that point, the kids will look up, and their eyes are all black. And that's
yeah, and these are not black contact lenses, people. Just a heads up.
Yeah, it's not black. And this is David Weatherly. I just Googled. I couldn't say David Weatherly, who we interviewed, and David's interviewed. Look, I interviewed a 16-year-old kid. Okay, and this is just my encounter with it, not my personal encounter, but it's one step away. I interviewed the kid who was 16 at the time and who had an encounter. This was his encounter, which is, and I told David Weatherly about it, who wrote the book on black-eyed kids. It's not contact lens, and these people aren't crazy. The kid's babysitting his 12-year-old sister, and his parents are gone. He's watching TV. All of a sudden, the lights start to flicker. The internet doesn't work. The doorbell rings. There's a knock on the door. He goes to the door, and this kid with blonde hair is there with his head down. And the kid wants to come in. And the guy goes, "Well, what do you want?" And then the kid looks up. It's the black eyes. He slams the door, goes running up, and gets to the foot of the stairs. He looks down. There's a window. He can see the front porch. The kid's not there anymore. There's no way for this kid to hide. He lives in a place, upscale neighborhood. Everybody's got an acre or two, and there's lawns in front. There's no way this kid, vanished like that. He was terrified, absolutely terrified. So his father contacted me and told me the story, and we prayed. Later on, about a week later, the kid called, and I interviewed him. And basically, he called up and said he was in a backslidden state, and this scared him back into recommitting his life to Jesus, which is what we did on the phone. And he also told me is possibly the gate which opened the thing up. His mother was dabbling in the Ouija board. So that's the open gate which allowed the thing to come through, and there you go. So.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Ouija board. I was just telling Doug that, what the number one comeback for games in North America is now popular and trendy with the youth is the Ouija board. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah, you're right
on
the money.
Wow, I cannot believe how fast this hour flew. Well, Ellie, I want you to tell people about your newest book and obviously give out your website for people.
It is www.lamarzulli.net, lamarzulli.net. I want to tell you guys something since I got you. Can I have another couple of minutes, or are you guys going to go for a hard break here or
Absolutely.
What? Let me tell you what's going on here. I'm about to, and this is an exclusive for you guys. I haven't said anything about this to anyone yet, so this is an exclusive for you. I'm about to release a book, On the Trail of a Nephilim, Volume 2. and there's some intellectual property there. My findings, my research, and specifically a researcher, I'm not going to mention any names, contacted me about 8 months ago, and he knew I had flown out to Catalina, and he asked me, did you find anything there? And I said, yeah, I found a lot of stuff. And he begged me, well, can you just give me one photo, which I did. Well, this gentleman, unfortunately, was in league at that time with a production company, which I didn't know about. And once they had the photo, the company flew the man out to Catalina. They are in post-production. It will be released. My work will be released not under my name, through this production company, through a major television network, probably in November. And basically, they took the picture, which I discovered. No one else discovered. It's my discovery, period. I found it. And I had it tested through 3 different people who analyzed the photographs using computer programs to determine the height of the skeleton that was found on Catalina Island. And the reason why we're able to do this is because Ralph Glidden, the archaeologist, was standing in a recently excavated pit, and in front of him was the giant. And that giant is about 8 foot 9 inches, between 8'6" and 9 feet, which corresponds to the newspaper articles. So, like a fool, I trusted this man and gave him the photograph. And needless to say, I'm actually doing an email blast next week to all of our people in our account. This is an exclusive for you guys. I'm going to show the picture on the blog. I'll probably release this on Thursday. Show it on the blog along with the chapter, along with the photographic analysis, because I've got to establish that this is my work. You know, it's only September, and I'm releasing it next week, so I'm on the record with it. It's my intellectual property. I discovered it. Here it is. So there you go.
That heads up in L.A., that's really quite frightening, isn't it? How people will go to extents to,
anything for a buck.
Anything
for a dollar.
Well, LA, God bless you for what you do. You have years of extensive research, and we wish you all the best. Folks, LA website is bookmarked at weekendvigilante.com. And Doug, wow, what a quick hour. That kind of flew by, didn't it?
Indeed it did, and I just want to thank L.A. for his time. I'll tell you what, I was thank you, Sheila, for conducting that interview. I was taking notes, and I've got to go back and listen to that again because there was so much to what he said. Unbelievable. And he never disappoints. So with that, Sheila, we're up against the break. I just want to let everyone know you're listening to a very special Saturday edition, the weekend edition with the Weekend Vigilante, Sheila Zelinsky, and of course Doug Hagman. Together we are the weekend edition of the Hagman and Hagman Report and the Weekend Vigilante. Kind of a hybrid, if you will. Done such great work. And folks, let me just throw this in here because, and by the way, Sheila has not said word one about this, but please, folks, support Sheila. I mean, go to weekendvigilante.com. Certainly support her work. She's working her butt off to get to bring the best guests possible for our weekend edition. And in fact, next week, Sheila, you'll be taking care of the Hagman and Hagman Report on Thursday and Friday. We want to thank you for that as well. So you've been doing some fantastic work, a lot of it behind the scenes, a lot of it, ladies and gentlemen, you'll never see, you'll never hear her talk about. And, wow, she's just incredible. So.
Well, thanks for that, Doug. Yeah. And you're right, we are up against the top of the hour. And, folks, stay tuned because we have a very exciting guest that we have not had on the program before, and I'm very excited to bring him on. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after the break.